Hey guys, today we're going to read chapter 1 from Chinua Achebe's Nigerian novel called Things Fall Apart, which was originally written in English. It is not a translation. I might stop throughout our reading of the chapter to comment on a few things, but for the most part, I really just want you guys to follow along, either in your book or on PDF. Okonkwo was well known throughout the 9 villages and even beyond. His fame rested on solid personal achievements. As a young man of 18, he brought honor to his village by throwing Omelins the cat. Omelins was the great wrestler who for 7 years was unbeaten, from Umuofia to Mabino. He was called the cat because his back would never touch the earth. It was this man that Okonkwo threw in a fight, which the old men agreed was one of the fiercest since the founder of their town engaged a spirit of the wild for 7 days and 7 nights. The drums beat, and the flutes sang, and the spectators held their breath. Omelins was a wily craftsman, but Okonkwo was as slippery as a fish in water. Every nerve and every muscle stood out on their arms, on their backs, and their thighs, and one almost heard them stretching to breaking point. In the end, Okonkwo threw the cat. That was many years ago, 20 years or more, and during this time, Okonkwo's fame had grown like a bushfire in the Harmattan. He was tall and huge, and his bushy eyebrows and wide nose gave him a very severe look. He breathed heavily, and it was said that when he slept, his wives and children in their houses could hear him breathe. So I want to pause for a minute. I was trying to find a cool way to do this with you guys, and the coolest thing I could come up with was YouTube, so hence the video. But you might be marking the text as you're reading to prepare for your essay, and you'll see that mine has a lot of annotations on it. And some of them are directly related to the essay prompt that you have to write, and some of them are more just like things that I discovered as I was rereading it and analyzing it and things like that. So one of the first things that I noticed in the first paragraph that I found to be really interesting is the repetition of the number 7. And it's repeated 3 times. And whenever you have repetition like that, meaning that the author is repeating the same thing so close together, there's a reason for it. He's a very smart man. He's an accomplished author. He knows what he's doing. So if you look at the symbolism of the number 7, you'll find that it has a very religious connotation, specifically a Christian connotation. We associate the number 7 with like heaven. The other thing that I looked up was symbolism of the number 3, because 7 is repeated 3 times in that first paragraph. And that also obviously has a Christian connotation. So my mind's already kind of thinking about what the author is trying to do here. Because the Igbo culture, which is the culture that Okonkwo is a part of, was not originally a Christian culture. We do know historically that the colonizers came from Europe to Africa and that they brought with them the Christian religion. So I think maybe in the first paragraph, we're kind of getting a glimpse of maybe foreshadowing of something that's going to come when the Westerners or the colonists arrive in Africa. And my question about the author's inclusion of that repetitive Christian number or numbers is how he feels about that kind of Christian intrusion. So I'm kind of keeping that in the back of my mind. The other thing I want to point out in this first part is that we are getting a lot of characterization of the character Okonkwo. He is our protagonist, our main character, and the author is incorporating a lot of what's called indirect characterization, meaning that he's not necessarily just straight out telling us about Okonkwo, but rather he is revealing character traits. He's showing us actions and accomplishments that he's made. And he does have some direct characterization too. He's physically describing Okonkwo for us. We know that he was a big guy. He was a powerful guy. He was a really good fighter, and he has a really good reputation. Okay, so we're going to continue on that first page. He breathed heavily, and it was said that when he slept, his wives and children in their houses could hear him breathe. Here we're learning something about the Igbo culture, also indirect. and that is that they have multiple wives and probably multiple homes as well. Spoiler alert, their culture lived in huts. So multiple wives, multiple huts. When he walked, his heels hardly touched the ground and he seemed to walk on springs, as if he was going to pounce on somebody. And he did pounce on people quite often. He had a slight stammer, and whenever he was angry and couldn't get his words out fast enough, he would use his fists. He had no patience with unsuccessful men. He had no patience with his father. Unoka, for that was his father's name, had died 10 years ago. In his day, he was lazy and improvident and was quite incapable of thinking about tomorrow. If any money came his way, and it seldom did, he immediately bought gourds of palm wine, called round his neighbors, and made merry. He always said that whenever he saw a dead man's mouth, he saw the folly of not eating what one had in one's lifetime. Unoka was, of course, a debtor, and he owed every neighbor some money, from a few cowries to quite substantial amounts. So here we're learning about the protagonist's father, Unoka, and I am suspecting that Unoka is what's called a foil. And in literature, what that is a character who is opposite of another character. And a lot of times writers introduce a foil so that we can see through that juxtaposition or that contrast. We can learn more about the protagonist. So everything that Unoka was, his son tries not to be. We are also seeing more glimpses of their culture again. A cowrie, which it mentions at the bottom of that paragraph, is also, it sounds like it's their form of money. He, meaning Unoka, Okonkwo's dad, he was tall but very thin and had a slight stoop. He wore a haggard and mournful look, except when he was drinking or playing on his flute. He was very good on his flute, and his happiest moments were the 2 or 3 moons after the harvest, when the village musicians brought down their instruments hung above the fireplace. Unoka would play with them, his face beaming with blessedness and peace. Sometimes another village would ask Unoka's band and their dancing igwugwu to come and stay with them and teach them their tunes. So for those of you who have an actual copy of the book, whether you have this version or another cover version, the words that are in Igbo in the book are italicized, and a lot of them are actually available for you in the glossary in the back of the book. If you flip to the back, you can find the glossary. And I don't know if you can see, but an igwugwu is a masquerader. So it's somebody who wears a mask who impersonates one of the ancestral spirits of the village. So you can kind of picture it's like somebody in the village, maybe they have like a celebration or a ceremony, they wear a mask and they impersonate one of the spirits. They would go to such hosts for as long as 2 or 3 or 4 markets, making music and feasting. Unoka loved the good fare, which is food, and the good fellowship, and he loved this season of the year when the rains had stopped and the sun rose every morning with a dazzling beauty. And it was not too hot either, because the cold and dry Harmattan wind was blowing down from the north. Some years the Harmattan was very severe, and a dense haze hung on the atmosphere. Old men and children would then sit round log fires, warming their bodies. Unoka loved it all, and he loved the first kites that returned with the dry season and the children who sang songs of welcome to them. He would remember his own childhood, how he had often wandered around looking for a kite sailing leisurely against the blue sky. As soon as he found one, he would sing with his whole being, welcoming it back from its long, long journey and asking if it had brought home any lengths of cloth. That was years ago, when he was young. Unoka the grown-up was a failure. He was poor, and his wife and children had barely enough to eat. People laughed at him because he was a loafer, and they swore never to lend him any more money because he never paid back. but Unoka was such a man that he always succeeded in borrowing more and piling up his debts. One day, a neighbor called Okoye came in to see him. He was reclining on a mud bed in his hut, playing on the flute. He immediately rose and shook hands with Okoye, who then unrolled the goatskin which he carried under his arm and sat down. Unoka went into an inner room and soon returned with a small wooden disc containing a kola nut, some alligator pepper, and a lump of white chalk. So in this paragraph, we're getting introduced to some more elements of their Igbo culture. And, you can Google things if you're not sure what they are. That's what good readers do if it's possible for them to Google. We Google. I will tell you, this is an interesting fact. The kola nut is, it's a nut that the tribesmen would chew on, and it was a social thing, but it also had caffeine. So I imagine it's kind of like when you meet a friend for coffee, something like that. And I believe that the kola nut was also actually an original ingredient in Coca-Cola, along with cocaine. Obviously, those two things are not in Coca-Cola anymore. You might want to fact check me on that, but I'm pretty sure that it was one of the ingredients. So we know that this is describing an incident with Unoka, who is the protagonist's father, and his friend Okoye, and we're not really sure where they're going with this yet, but we're going to see. I suspect that what the author is about to do is he's probably going to recall an incident with Unoka and his friend that illustrates the laziness and borrowing issue that Unoka had in his lifetime. "I have cola," he announced when he sat down and passed the disc over to his guest. "Thank you. He who brings cola brings life." "But I think you ought to break it," replied Okoye, passing back the disc. "No, it's for you, I think." And they argued like this for a few moments before Unoka accepted the honor of breaking the cola. Okoye, meanwhile, took the lump of chalk, drew some lines on the floor, and then painted his big toe. As he broke the cola, Unoka prayed to their ancestors for life and health and for protection against their enemies. When they had eaten, they talked about many things, about the heavy rains which were drowning the yams, about the next ancestral feast, and about the impending war with the village of Mabino. Unoka was never happy when it came to wars. He was in fact a coward and couldn't bear the sight of blood, and so he changed the subject and talked about music, and his face beamed. He could hear in his mind's ear the blood-stirring and intricate rhythms of the ekwe and the udu and the ojin, and he could hear his own flute weaving in and out of them, decorating them with a colorful and plaintive tune. The total effect was gay and brisk, but if one picked out the flute as it went up and down and then broke up into short snatches, one saw that there was sorrow and grief there. Okoye was also a musician. He played on the ojin, but he was not a failure like Unoka. He had a large barn full of yams, and he had 3 wives. And now he was going to take the Idemili title, the 3rd highest in the land. It was a very expensive ceremony, and he was gathering all his resources together. That was in fact the reason why he had come to see Unoka. He cleared his throat and began. "Thank you for the cola. You may have heard of the title I intend to take shortly." Having spoken plainly so far, Okoye said the next 6 sentences in proverbs. Among the Igbo, the art of conversation is regarded very highly, and proverbs are the palm oil with which words are eaten. So, quick pause. We started this unit by studying proverbs, and what they are, proverbs or proverbs, pronunciation either way is fine. But what they are is they are short, witty sayings that convey a general truth. And a lot of times they use exaggeration. Sometimes they have allusions to other famous things in them. A lot of times they create metaphors or analogies, juxtaposition. There's a lot of, those are probably the most common rhetorical strategies that create proverbs. And so what they're doing here in this paragraph, we're learning a lot in this first chapter just about their culture and the ways that it differs from our own cultures. But in this particular paragraph, we're actually learning about their language and how their language is literally different from ours, but it's also like the way that they organize their thoughts and communicate with each other is different. And a lot of us come from different cultures. I don't know about your specific culture, but at least in America, in American culture, a lot of times we appreciate people who get right to the point. We do not want people to kind of circle around their main idea. We get really impatient and we're like, what are you trying to say? That's not the case in the Igbo culture. In fact, they're about to comment on that. It's considered rude in the Igbo culture if you go directly to your point. Instead, they talk in circles. Okay, it's kind of like the gyre or the spiral at the beginning of the book in the epigraph. So the way they speak is like that. Here's where I'm going with this. The book is written like that. And I think that's one reason why a lot of American students don't like this book. It's because it kind of meanders, it kind of wanders, it kind of circles around. There's a whole chapter about yams. Yes, there's a chapter about yams. And there's a reason that it's in there, but you have to work to figure out why it's in there. You have to be willing to put in the effort and analyze, and I'll help you do that. But so this, I think if you go into this book knowing that it's written that way and seeing it as an artifact of their culture and not letting it annoy you too much, that you will appreciate the book a lot more. So we'll continue with this paragraph. Okoye was a great talker, and he spoke for a long time, skirting around the subject and then hitting it finally, I told you. In short, he was asking Unoka to return the 200 cowries he had borrowed from him more than 2 years before. As soon as Unoka understood what his friend was driving at, he burst out laughing. He laughed loud and long, and his voice rang out clear as the Ojin, and tears stood in his eyes. His visitor was amazed and sat speechless. At the end, Unoka was able to give an answer between fresh bursts of mirth. "Look at that wall," he said, pointing at the far wall of his hut, which was rubbed with red earth so that it shone. "Look at those lines of chalk." And Okoye saw groups of short perpendicular lines drawn in chalk. There were 5 groups, and the smallest group had 10 lines. Unoka had a sense of the dramatic, and so he allowed a pause in which he took a pinch of snuff and sneezed noisily. And then he continued. "Each group there represents a debt to someone, and each stroke is 100 cowries. You see, I owe that man 1,000 cowries, but he has not come to wake me up in the morning for it. I shall pay you, but not today. Our elders say that the sun will shine on those who stand before it shines on those who kneel under them. I shall pay my big debts first." And he took another pinch of snuff, as if that was paying the big debts first. Okoye rolled his goatskin and departed. When Unoka died, he had taken no title at all, and he was heavily in debt. Any wonder, then, that his son Okonkwo was ashamed of him? Fortunately, among these people, a man was judged according to his worth, and not the worth of his father. Okonkwo was clearly cut out for great things. He was still young, but he had won fame as the greatest wrestler in the 9 villages. He was a wealthy farmer, and he had 2 barns full of yams, and he had just married his 3rd wife. To crown it all, he had taken 2 titles and had shown incredible prowess in 2 intertribal wars. And so, although Okonkwo was still young, he was already one of the greatest men of his time. Age was respected among the Igbo, but achievement was revered. As the elders said, if a child washed his hands, he could eat with kings. Okonkwo had clearly washed his hands, and so he ate with kings and elders. And that was how he came to look after the doomed lad who was sacrificed to the village of Umuofia by their neighbors to avoid war and bloodshed. The ill-fated lad was called Ikamafuna. And that is, in my opinion, really good foreshadowing. We do not know anything more about Ikamafuna yet. We know that he is an ill-fated lad, so I think that adjective to describe him is it's very foreshadowing, it's very foreboding. And ironically, it also kind of harkens to, in my mind, almost Shakespearean language, almost like a Romeo and Juliet tragedy. So there's a lot to think about in this first chapter, being introduced to this new culture, but also seeing kind of glimpses or implicit allusions to European culture, our culture as well. So thank you for sitting down and reading chapter 1 with me. If you have discussion questions, particularly for this chapter, make sure that you answer them. And also, if you're taking notes to prepare for an essay or doing annotations, make sure you go back if you have not been doing that and mark anything that you might be able to use as evidence. All right, have a great day, you guys. Bye.